Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming and thank you for your interest. As John said, I'm going to take you through a bit of an overview of GA, so it'll necessarily be very quick, but at the end of it I'm happy to take any questions you might have and explain a little bit more about what we do. So Geoscience Australia is an agency within the portfolio, or an entity as we're required to say these days, and we're the government's technical advisors in all matters geographic and geological. The information helps government, industry and the community meet the challenges through evidence-based decision making in a whole range of areas, including our economy, our safety around natural hazards and helping to address environmental issues. What I have on the screen at the moment are the 6 fundamental strategic objectives that we have. And the important thing to understand about Geoscience Australia is that we only work with government. We do not respond to tenders and we do not seek private sector funding for any of our activities. In addition to the Department of Industry, we partner with 17 other government departments or entities and do so on the basis of co-investment or full cost recovery depending on the nature of the work. Currently we derive about 30% of our income from these partnerships with other entities or departments. So as I said, our work benefits the Australian community by focusing on these 6 objectives, and what I'm going to do now is take you through each of those and give you a quick example of what we do under each of those 6 objectives. So in terms of building Australia's resource wealth, you'll well appreciate in this portfolio that the resources sector is a fundamental component of our national wealth and makes a very significant contribution to the economy. The starting point for all of this work is the pre-competitive work that we do offshore on behalf of the government or onshore in partnership with our state and territory partners to build a prospectus to attract exploration investment to Australia. So what we're doing in building a prospectus is essentially selling the asset that belongs to all Australians, that is its resource base and its natural endowment. Well, let me give you a couple of examples to illustrate how well this can work, but one onshore and one offshore. What we're zooming into here is the Great Australian Bight, and this little area down the bottom there, the fuzzy blue bit, actually contains a very thick section of sediment, and we knew about this from some preliminary work we'd done when we were defining Australia's jurisdictional boundaries, and we knew there was a very large basin with potential, but it was in very deep water, in very rough waters. The waters of the Great Australian Bight are very difficult to explore in. So we went in and did a program to assess whether or not there was petroleum potential in this basin. That led to a well, the little one that you see in the bright pink spot there, drilled by Woodside. It was not successful and companies lost interest. So we went back again and we found some, went and dredged some rocks from some of the canyons that are in this area and demonstrated that the area did have the right kind of source rocks and should have great petroleum potential. This led to further work, and what you see there now are the acreage tenements that are held by industry. These tenements represent $1.2 billion worth of work plan commitments. We'd spent $6 million, just over $6 million to attract that kind of attention into Australia. So it's a very good example of what a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of information which removes the key knowledge barriers to exploration can leverage for Australia. What we're attempting to achieve here is a new petroleum province. Australia hasn't had a new petroleum province for 30 years, and if we're going to sustain the resources pipeline we need one, and this is probably the best opportunity we have to achieve that. Onshore, as I said, we work in the mineral space, we work with our state and territory partners, and this graphic is taking you through a plot of where the outcrop geology occurs, and all the dots are our major mines currently. And nearly all of them occur in areas where there's some sort of signal that you can detect near the surface, outcropping rocks, something you can detect with geophysical tools or geochemical tools. But Australia's position globally in terms of mineral exploration has declined. We used to attract around 20% of global exploration dollars. Currently we get about 12. And this is partly because companies perceive Australia as well explored and too difficult to work in. What we're attempting to do is to change that perception by actually now exploring the areas and we call undercover. So the fuzzy grey and greeny stuff down to the left-hand corner of this, you can see an outline of material underneath that cover. So where the bright blue dots, sorry, I'm just pointing these out, where these dots finish, this is Mount Isa, and you can see the trends actually continue out under the plains and the covers to the south there. We're doing work to investigate that basement geology with the view of putting sufficient information on the table for industry to be able to make informed decisions about whether or not they should go and explore in those spaces. In community safety space, Our key partner here is Attorney Generals and Emergency Management Australia. And Australia's ability to effectively mitigate the impacts of natural hazards and disasters is contingent upon the availability of information on the incident and impact of specific hazards and on early warnings and advice. We work to provide geoscience understanding to assist the mitigation of and response to natural hazards, including earthquakes, bushfires, floods, severe winds and even volcanic eruptions amongst our near neighbours. We work with a range of partners across the Australian Government and in the Asian Pacific region. The primary aim of our international work that's carried out with DFAT is around hazard and risk reduction programs to help strengthen the capacity of the agencies in those countries. Currently we're working in Papua New Guinea, Indonesia and the Philippines. So let me again show you two examples of the sort of work that we do. This is the earthquake hazard map for the whole of Australia, and you can see the brighter colours, the greater the potential hazard from earthquake. Several of our major cities are at risk from earthquakes: Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne and Sydney. And the earthquake risk in Sydney is the biggest uninsured natural hazard risk left on the planet in reality, because we don't know. If a Newcastle type event occurred in Sydney under the CBD, the amount of damage would be very, very substantial. See, what do we do with this? This actually goes to the building code. So the building code in this department uses this information to build in requirements in terms of in terms of these sorts of hazards. The other thing we're doing following the floods in Queensland a couple of years ago is building a flood risk portal, which will provide existing flood information on the potential risk for communities. And we're also rebuilding the rainfall and runoff modelling, which is about 30 years old, I think, so it needs to be upgraded for the changes in the landscape and the changes in the urban environment, and we're funding that upgrade by Engineers Australia. That will provide a basis for better and for further modelling of the risk around flooding in our major cities. Securing Australia's water resources. Clearly water is one of those fundamental issues for a country like this, the driest inhabited continent on the planet. But we have a very sparse understanding of our groundwater resources, and Geoscience Australia works in the groundwater space primarily, but not exclusively. We do work with the Bureau of Meteorology on our what we call the blue line network, so the hydrography layer or the rivers and streams and water bodies layer, to better define those. We've been working in this space for a little while now, and one of the things that we need to do in terms of that we do provide a lot of work is to provide the geological framework for the groundwater assessments in the areas impacted by coal seam gas. But again, let me give you one example. This is a little movie, and I'll run it twice, so just watch it and then I'll explain what it is. We were approached by the Department of Environment several years ago now to do a study for an alternative water supply for Broken Hill. Broken Hill's water supply comes from these lakes, the Menindee Lakes in western New South Wales. They hold a huge amount of water in the lakes, and they're basically great big evaporation pans. They hold nearly 400 gigalitres. The town needs 10, the other 390 evaporates. So the question was, could we provide a source of groundwater for both storage or utilisation of water when it's available, so that the other 390 litres could be made available for other uses further down the river. So what this little movie shows you is an analysis that we've done using our satellite archive, and I'll explain how we've done this a little later. Showing the frequency of water, frequency of inundation in these lakes over the last decade or so. So I'll just run it again quickly. You can see the lakes dry up through that millennium drought and then refill when the floodwaters came down in 10 and 11. So the bright colours are the areas that see a lot of water. The paler colours are the areas that haven't seen much water at all. So you can see the lakes themselves. The bigger lakes down here on the left-hand side in the red colours haven't had a lot of water in through that period. But the really important part of this is actually the top of the diagram, where the two lakes show a high frequency of water. You can actually see the Darling River channel has a lot of water in it at that time during the floods. That's the only site where you can get shallow groundwater recharge. If there's no water on the surface, you won't get any groundwater under the surface. So this enabled us to determine where we would target the studies that we did to find an alternative water supply, and there are many potential aquifers in that Darling Valley channel that could provide Broken Hill with very good quality water. Australia's marine jurisdiction, you'll probably be aware it's enormous. It's 1.5 times the size of the landmass, and we provide a whole range of information that supports the management of that offshore environment. So just to remind you what it looks like, we're looking at here in terms of the, it's 4% of the global ocean, and it's 1.5 times Australia's landmass. Currently, our knowledge of this environment is limited. We know a lot about the oceanography, but we know little about the geology. And it also represents some of the frontier areas where we undertake work for petroleum exploration. But the work that we do here helps define the boundaries which underpins the offshore petroleum regime. It helps with fisheries management, it helps with immigration issues, and it helps with environmental management. And we do a lot of work in that space. Providing fundamental geographic information, we're the authoritative source of fundamental information, including satellite imagery, maps and global navigation information. The agency's operational and geospatial capability supports understandings of the positional needs of Australia, including monitoring real-time changes in the structure of the continent. The work is integral to facilitating better access to accurate positioning information, and I'll explain what that's around at the moment. But accurate positioning information goes into almost everything we do. Every time you go off with your GPS on, you're dependent on GA for that to work effectively because we provide the reference frame. That tells your device where it is in relation to the satellites and the maps that you're using to find your way to wherever it is you're trying to get to. But let me show you some of the things that will be, why this will be important going into the future. The little list there to the right-hand side of the map, and I'll explain the map in a moment, are the providers of GPS systems. You know what you call your GPS a GPS at the moment, your positioning device. That's the US system, Global Positioning System. Russia, China, the European Union, Japan and India are all putting up their own satellites to provide what's really, the proper term is a Global Navigation Satellite System, GNSS systems. The red hotspot on the map is the areas of the planet that will see all of those systems. So you can see that Australia will see all of the global navigation systems that are being launched. And we have an opportunity to exploit that to actually, what we plan to do by 2020 is to have 2 centimetre positioning anywhere in the Australian jurisdiction at any time, and you'll be able to do that on your mobile device. Now you're not going to need 2 centimetres, but if you're in an autonomous vehicle, in intelligent transport, and you're sitting in your car and you're travelling along the Hume Highway, and you're not driving, you're going to need 2 centimetres. And that's where we're going. Autonomous vehicles are here. You could walk out of here within the next 12 months and buy a car up from Nissan or Mercedes that will do that. Without accurate positioning, you won't be able to turn it on. So here's a range of applications that I'm just talking about. The top right-hand corner is the actual movement of the planet, that movement of the continent. Australia's moving on a northeasterly trajectory at about 7 centimetres a year. That's the rate at which your fingernail grows. You might think that's not very much, but if you're in precision agriculture and you want to drive your vehicle down the same wheel tracks every year, after a decade it will have moved nearly a metre. So you're starting to compact your soil. And farmers have got enormous benefits out of precision agriculture based on precision positioning. I've talked about intelligent transport. One of the interesting recent developments we've discovered is one of the corrections we have to make to the signal between the satellite and our receivers is actually what's happening in the upper atmosphere with moisture. That's an error that we throw out. BOM are using that now as part of their weather forecasting because it gives them upper atmosphere humidity measurements. We've been in this business for over 60 years and we collect a lot of information. One of the real values of collecting information well and archiving it correctly is that it has enduring value. So one of our great challenges is to make sure that we have that data available and that it's made available to whoever wants to use it. So one of the things that we've done recently is actually make our satellite imagery more accessible to people by correcting it and lining it up so that the entire archive is available. So what this diagram is showing is for a point that's actually over Canberra is that we can locate that point since 1987 right through to now in exactly the same position on the planet. So we've had to correct for atmospheric effects, we've had to correct for plate tectonic movement, we've had to correct for orbital variations. But because we've now lined all of those up and we can trust every pixel, and the pixel in each of these images are 25 metres square, that means we can be very confident that through time we're comparing exactly the same site, and that's fundamentally important. And this is my last diagram to illustrate why that is. This is an area up in the Guida where we can get down to a paddock level, and by extracting biophysical properties out of the spectrum, we can actually look at what's happened in that individual paddock. What's the farmer done? So you can see here the irrigated crop through the drought, when was water available for them to crop, as opposed to a rain-fed paddock. I won't go through all the details there, but we can distinguish cropping events, harvesting, fallow events and so on and so forth. This has enormous applications in crop forecasting. There's something like $1 trillion each year traded in crop futures. This will give a basis for how you might look at that and how you might manage that, how you might understand what the harvest might look like. I'll stop there and very quick rapid overview of the agency. The key takeaway message is we only work within government. We're here to assist you if you'd like to know anything about the solid earth or indeed it's the shape of the continent and what's happening and any variations through time. We can bring to bear knowledge on any of those issues that you might be interested in. So thanks for your attention.